Before the Witch King loomed as a shadow of menace over the lands of Middle-earth, before his chilling cry echoed through the ages, he was a mortal man. But what manner of man was he? What do we know of his life before he succumbed to the power of his ring? And what evil twist of fate drove him into the hands of Sauron? We will answer these questions and more as we plunge into the depths of a tale steeped in magic and dread. So join me as we unravel the haunting origins of the Witch King of Angmar. During the Second Age of Middle-earth, Sauron came to Eregion, shrouded in fair form, offering wisdom and guidance. It was in this land, where the elves hungered for greater mastery in their craft, that his counsel was most eagerly welcomed. For in their hearts there was a restlessness, and Sauron perceived this yearning, and he fed it. With soft words and keen insights, he offered knowledge, dark and seductive. His lore was vast, and the elves received his teachings eagerly. Under Sauron's tutelage, the craft of Celebrimbor and the Gwaith y Myrdain reached new heights. Their forges burned brighter, and their hammers rang with newfound purpose. In those days, the rings of power were made, crafted by skilled artisans and guided by Sauron's subtle hand. Yet, while the elves labored in pursuit of the preservation of beauty, Sauron's true purpose lay in domination. He sought not only to teach, but to bind them. And so, after 390 years, during which time the elves slowly learned and perfected their craft, Sauron put the final part of his plan into action. He forged a master ring in the fires of Mount Doom. Into his ring, he poured much of his own strength, for only a ring of exceptional potency could control the others and bring all of their bearers under the dominion of the One. When at last the One Ring was complete, Sauron placed it upon his finger, and in that moment his plan came to fruition. And with the One Ring upon his black hand, his sight stretched far, and he could see all of the workings of the rings of power. Through them, he traced every deed shaped by their influence. And more than this, he could peer into the minds of those who bore them, and even take control of their very thoughts, bending their actions to his will. Yet the natural perception of the elves allowed them to realize that they had been deceived, and they understood his true intent. He was no teacher, but a master, seeking dominion over Middle-earth. In defiance of this power, the elves removed their rings, and Sauron's control, so cunningly devised, was shattered. The defiance of the elves kindled Sauron's rage into a storm, and he marshaled his legions and marched north. And in the year 1697 of the Second Age, he sacked Eregion, slaying Celebrimbor, piercing him with arrows and raising his body as a grim war banner. But he, finding that he was betrayed and that the elves were not deceived, was filled with wrath, and he came against them with open war, demanding that all the rings should be delivered to him, since the elven smiths could not have attained to their making without his law and counsel. But the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved and bore them away and hid them. The elves were able to hide the 3, Velia, Nenya, and Narya. Yet, Sauron was able to locate the remaining rings of power before the forces of Numenor arrived to reinforce the elves. In his dark wisdom, he saw that these rings still had much potential. For although the elves had understood his true intent, others were less perceptive. And so he scattered them like seeds of corruption across Middle-earth. 7 he gave to the dwarves. Stubborn and proud in equal measure, they possessed a natural resistance to the power of the rings, and they would not fall under Sauron's dominion. However, the power of the rings still held some sway over them. The gold they had always enjoyed now grew to dominate their thoughts, twisting their hearts. The great hordes of their kings, legendary in their splendor, grew ever greater, but this newfound wealth brought ruin upon them. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring, but all those hordes long ago were plundered and the dragons devoured them, and of the 7 rings, some were consumed in fire and some Sauron recovered. Thus, the evil of the rings worked much to the advantage of Sauron, even if it was in a manner which he did not originally intend. Yet, in men, Sauron found the most fertile ground for his designs, for they did not possess the perception of the elves nor the resilience of the dwarves, and they greatly desired the longevity that the rings offered. And so to men, he gifted the greatest number of rings, 9 for mortal men doomed to die. Sometime after the year 1697 of the Second Age, Sauron would offer 9 of the Rings of Power to a selection of men from across Middle-earth. But who were these men? The shadows of history may obscure their names, yet clues regarding their origins can be discovered within the texts of the Legendarium. In one of Tolkien's letters, we find the following quote: "There were evil Númenóreans, Sauronians, but they do not come into this story except remotely, as the wicked kings who had become Nazgûl or Ringwraiths. So we know that at least some of the Nazgûl were once evil men of Númenor. But the passage also speaks of kings, and yet, upon the island realm of Númenor, only one king ever reigned at any given time, and all of the sovereigns of Westernesse are recorded and accounted for. No ruler inexplicably vanished, and the only king of Númenor that we know to have ever met Sauron was Ar-Pharazôn, who was sealed within the caves of the Forgotten during the events of the drowning of Númenor. So how is it possible that some of the Nazgûl were Númenorian kings? Tolkien's Legendarium, like a great river, shifted and carved new paths as it flowed through time. Not every word remains fixed, especially when currents of contradiction flow from other parts of the text. And in this case, it seems as though Tolkien would conclude that not all of the Nazgûl were kings after all. The following quote from the Silmarillion tells us that the Númenorian Nazgûl were in fact lords. "Yet Sauron was ever guileful, and it is said that among those whom he ensnared with the 9 rings, 3 were great lords of Númenorian race." This quote provides us with a deal more clarity. Not only does it reveal the exact number of Nazgûl who were of Númenorian descent, it also confirms that they were in fact not kings, but lords of Númenor. And in this distinction, the pieces of the tale fall seamlessly into place, aligning more neatly with other aspects of the lore. But what do we know of these 3 lords? The appendices tell of a time when Númenorian ambition swelled like the tide that carried their proud ships forth from their island home. It was around the year 1800 of the Second Age, a full century after Sauron reclaimed the Rings of Power, that the ships of Númenor ventured east once more, establishing dominions upon the shores of Middle-earth. The appendices go on to inform us that the Nazgûl first appear around the year 2251. Therefore, a gap of 451 years separates the coming of the Númenorians and the emergence of the Nazgûl. Time enough for even the long-lived men of Westernesse to gradually succumb to the corruption of the Rings of Power. Time enough for their bodies to fade, for their spirits to become enslaved, their souls forever shackled to the will of the Dark Lord. So we can reasonably deduce that 3 of the 9 Ringwraiths were once lords of Númenor, who were likely drawn from the colonies that sprouted along Middle-earth's coasts. But was the Witch King counted among the 3 Númenorians? Or was he one of the other 6 who hailed from other realms of men? The Númenorians stood apart from other men. Towering above their lesser kin, their strength and prowess in battle was unmatched. They were so formidable, in fact, that even Sauron, who controlled much of Middle-earth at the time, feared their coming. He looked with hatred on the Eldar, and he feared the men of Numenor who came back at whiles in their ships to the shores of Middle-earth. But for long he dissembled his mind and concealed the dark designs that he shaped in his heart. Sauron, ever the master of manipulation, would have been eager to bend such formidable strength to his will. Their long lives, their great wisdom, and their towering strength made them ideally suited to his dark purposes. Thus it would follow that the Witch King, the most formidable of the Nazgul, would have been of Númenórean descent. And we know that Sauron favored the Númenóreans when choosing his highest-ranking servants. The mouth of Sauron, that wretched herald who spoke with the weight of his master's malice, was one such man, a black Númenórean who had traded honor for dark power. You may have noted that I described the mouth of Sauron as a black Númenórean, but I have only described the Witch King as an evil Númenórean. This distinction is purposeful. There is a common misconception that the Witch King is a black Númenórean. However, the term Black Númenórean is actually an alternate name for the King's Men, that is, those who followed the kings of Númenor in their hostility toward the Eldar and in their rebellion against the Valar. By the time the King's Men established themselves in the year 2251, the Witch King had already completed his transition and had become one of the Nazgul. So it is impossible for him to have been a Black Númenórean, as they quite simply did not exist yet. And regarding the Númenórean lineage of the Witch King, it is worth noting that there may be a subtle clue hidden within the pages of the Fellowship of the Ring, an Easter egg within the text that Tolkien may have left deliberately for particularly eagle-eyed readers to stumble upon. The riders halted, but Frodo had not the power of Bombadil. His enemies laughed at him with a harsh and chilling laughter. "Come back! Come back!" they called. "To Mordor we will take you." "Go back," he whispered. "The ring! The ring!" they cried with deadly voices. And immediately their leader urged his horse forward into the water, followed closely by two others. As the tale unfolds, we learn that only the Witch King and two other wraiths, drawn irresistibly by the ring, dared to ride forth into the water. And we know that three of the Nazgul were once men of Númenor, an island realm. Seafarers they had been in life, masters of wind and wave. Could it be that these three, the only ones bold enough to breach the water's edge, were those very same mariners of old? This is certainly a possibility. Another lingering whisper of the Witch King's past resides within his very name. A title heavy with the weight of ancient sorcery, hinting at his affinity with the arcane arts and his ability to bend the unseen forces of the world to his will. The oldest known meaning for the word witch is a practitioner of magic, a sorcerer or enchanter. Interestingly, in Old English, the word witcher was actually masculine and applied to male sorcerers, and Gandalf speaks of the Witch King's past during the Council of Elrond, stating that he was a sorcerer of old. For even the wise might fear to withstand the Nine when they are gathered together under their fell chieftain. A great king and sorcerer he was of old, and now he wields a deadly fear. Confusingly, Gandalf also states that the Witch King was once a great king. Yet, as we have already established, he did not rule in Númenor, and so Gandalf's meaning must lie elsewhere. Though he never sat upon the throne of Númenor, the Witch King did rule a kingdom in the Third Age. Long after he surrendered his soul to Sauron, he established the Witch Realm of Angmar, a frozen land of darkness and cruelty. It was there, in the realm that he carved out for himself in the colds of the north, that he gained his name, the Witch King of Angmar. And so, when Gandalf speaks of him as a king of old, it is not Númenor's splendor he recalls, but the dark throne of Angmar. So as you can see, the exact identity of the Witch King is one of the many mysteries of Middle-earth. Tolkien left only whispers and fragments of his early years. Yet, through the scattered remnants of lore that we have pieced together, I will now attempt to paint a picture of his early life, unraveling the tale of the man he once was before darkness claimed him. The Witch King was not born in shadow, but in splendor. A child of Numenor's noble blood, it is likely that he drew his first breath upon the island kingdom that stood as the mightiest realm of men. His birth, likely between the years 1500 and 1600 of the Second Age, placed him beneath the rule of Tar Telperien, Numenor's second ruling queen. Going by this estimate, in 1695, when Sauron led his legions into Eriador to reclaim his stolen rings of power, the Witch King would have been a man in his prime. It was at this time that the Elven High King, Gil-galad, sent word across the seas for aid, and from Numenor a great navy was sent forth and Sauron was defeated. Being a mighty lord of Numenor, it is entirely possible that the Witch King could have actually led men against Sauron at this time, doing battle with the forces of the Dark Lord that he would one day come to serve. And it was this victory that emboldened the Númenóreans, who stood tall in power and glory unrivaled. As one of high lineage, the Witch King would have been blessed with long life, and he would enjoy around 350 years beneath the sun before death would claim him. But the blessing of their long years did not dull the rising tide of discontentment that churned within Númenor's populace. They questioned the ban of the Valar, and they wondered why they must die while the Eldar lingered on, seemingly untouched by the passing of time. By the year 1800, the Númenóreans had turned their gaze once more to Middle-earth, but now they saw it not as a place of allies, but as a land ripe for conquest, waiting to be claimed. It is likely that the Witch King was among those who came now to Middle-earth, a conqueror stepping onto foreign soil, a lord of men. And they sailed now with power and armory to Middle-earth, and they came no longer as bringers of gifts, nor even as rulers, but as fierce men of war. And they hunted the men of Middle-earth and took their goods and enslaved them, and many they slew cruelly upon their altars. It may have been in those grim days that the Witch King first toyed with the art of sorcery. Of course, his true mastery of the occult may not have been possible until he received his Ring of Power, when shadow and magic became one with his very being. Yet, Tolkien does describe the men who received the rings from Sauron as being wicked and evil before they were transformed into wraiths. Thus, in those days of sacrifice and conquest, when darkness stretched across the world, it is tempting to wonder if he had already begun to dabble in his dark craft. What if, long before his fate was sealed, he had already whispered incantations to the void and been drawn to the unseen forces that would one day transform him into a terror beyond reckoning? Regardless, he was no innocent soul who was led astray by Sauron's insidious corruption. Rather, he was already a creature of cruelty, already a man who had found power through the suffering of others. And so, when the rings were finally bestowed upon men, when Sauron chose him, the Witch King did not resist. For though he was already a mighty lord, he wanted more. For he desired ever greater power, dominion over life, and an escape from death. And in the end, he would have it, at a cost beyond reckoning. The Lord of Numenor, who would become the Witch King, was chosen to bear one of the 9 rings. But why did Sauron select him? Aside from the fact that Sauron would have wanted to recruit powerful Númenóreans to his cause for the reasons already discussed, Each of the 9 men selected by Sauron had one thing in common. They each possessed a hunger, a yearning that set them apart from other men. They desired ever greater power, power that would set them above all others. But Sauron gathered into his hands all the remaining rings of power, and he dealt them out to the other peoples of Middle-earth, hoping thus to bring under his sway all those that desired secret power beyond the measure of their kind. And great power he would have, for the rings of power gave their bearers great dominion over the mortal realm. The Witch King wielded his gift, amplifying his sorcery, bending reality to his will. In his day, he was mighty beyond measure. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. Was power enough to hold a man fast to his ring, even as the negative effects of bearing it became apparent? If not, then it was fortunate for Sauron that there was another force at work. One deeper, darker, more inescapable, the fear of death. The ever-present shadow that loomed over all men, twisting their fates, driving them to seek what was forever beyond their grasp: immortality. Even the mightiest lords of Numenor could not escape their fear of the end. It clung to them, an unseen weight upon their hearts, turning their thoughts ever toward what lay beyond that final veil. But to seek life unending was to stand against the natural order, to defy the will of Eru Ilúvatar, the Creator. To attempt by device or magic to recover longevity is thus a supreme folly and wickedness of mortals. Longevity or counterfeit immortality is the chief bait of Sauron. It leads the small to a golem and the great to a ringwraith. Their lives were stretched beyond the limits of mortal men, it is true, but they were not gifted life anew. Instead, the life that was given to them was drawn out and reshaped into something else entirely. As the Witch King's life was stretched and elongated beyond its natural span, a slow and insidious corruption took hold, coiling itself around his soul. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Bilbo describes the feeling that he experiences due to the ring elongating his natural lifespan beyond its original limits. "I am old, Gandalf. I don't look it, but I am beginning to feel it in my heart of hearts. Well preserved indeed," he snorted. "Why, I feel all thin, sort of stretched, if you know what I mean, like butter that has been scraped over too much bread. That can't be right. I need a change, or something." The power that the Witch King had become accustomed to began to chain him. His spirit, once bright with the fire of mortal will, decayed beneath the weight of his ring. And Sauron was not yet finished. The ring's power alone was a poison slow and unrelenting, but he possessed further sorceries that he was yet to unleash. Sauron now wove nightmares into the fabric of the Witch King's thoughts, twisting shadows into illusions. They had, as it seemed, unending life, yet life became unendurable to them. They could walk if they would, unseen by all eyes in this world beneath the sun, and they could see things in worlds invisible to mortal men. But too often they beheld only the phantoms and delusions of Sauron. The Dark Lord is well known as a master of deception, who wove illusions that clawed at the very fabric of reality, designed to weaken resistance and drown the soul in submission. To become a wraith was to drift between worlds, and in this liminal torment, Sauron's visions may have hastened the descent, twisting perception until the Witch King no longer knew where the waking world ended and the spectral realm began. And one by one, sooner or later, according to their native strength and to the good or evil of their wills in the beginning, they fell under the thraldom of the ring that they bore, and under the domination of the One, which was Sauron's, and they became forever invisible save to him that wore the ruling ring, and they entered into the realm of shadows. The Witch King crossed the threshold of the mortal world, forsaking his flesh. All mortal joys were now lost to him. The warmth of the sun, the caress of the wind upon his skin were now but distant echoes of a life abandoned. When Frodo placed the ring upon his finger at Weathertop, he peers into the Wraith world, and what was once concealed stood stark before him. The Wraiths, no longer shrouded in dark robes, revealed their true forms, their spectral essence laid bare, and their spellbound blades shimmered, revealing their enchantments, the woven spells upon them no longer hidden from sight. It is a place where the unseen becomes visible and where the Witch King reigns. He shut his eyes and struggled for a while, but resistance became unbearable, and at last he slowly drew out the chain and slipped the ring on the forefinger of his left hand. Immediately, though everything else remained as before, dim and dark, the shapes became terribly clear. He was able to see beneath their black wrappings. There were 5 tall figures, 2 standing on the lip of the dell, 3 advancing. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long grey robes. Upon their grey hairs were helms of silver. In their haggard hands were swords of steel. Their eyes fell on him and pierced him as they rushed towards him. Desperate, he drew his own sword, and it seemed to him that it flickered red, as if it was a firebrand. 2 of the figures halted. The third was taller than the others. His hair was long and gleaming, and on his helm was a crown. In one hand he held a long sword, and in the other a knife. Both the knife and the hand that held it glowed with a pale light. Now that his transition, his fading, was complete, the Witch King was trapped within this unseen realm, and henceforth he would know only the iron will of Sauron, only servitude, steeped in unrelenting and eternal torment. The Witch King first revealed himself around the year 2251, and his presence was terrifying to behold. He was a figure wreathed in dread, a phantom of malevolence. And as he had surrendered his very soul to Sauron, he now stood highest in his master's esteem. To him, Sauron entrusted the most vital of tasks, the grim errands upon which the fate of Middle-earth would rest, and none was more crucial than the hunt for the ring. At length he resolved that no others would serve him in this case but his mightiest servants, the Ringwraiths, who had no will but his own, being each utterly subservient to the ring that had enslaved him, which Sauron held. Yet, the Witch King was now a being of pure terror, and wherever he passed, the air grew heavy with despair, and the hearts of men turned to ice. Such a servant was undoubtedly useful to one such as Sauron, but there were times when the terror he exuded was actually detrimental to the task at hand. When silence and secrecy were needed, the Witch King's aura of fear betrayed his presence, for doom traveled with him. So great was the terror that went with them, even invisible and unclad, that their coming forth might soon be perceived and their mission be guessed by the wise. And so, when he set forth in pursuit of the ring, along with the other Ringwraiths, he shed all trappings of form. Over Anduin he passed, unclad and unmounted, unseen by mortal eyes. And as he passed through Anorion, and over the Entwade, and so into the Wold, such was the terror of his coming that the beasts of the earth and air shrank from his presence, and the rumor of him spread throughout the land. The Witch King had become more than a mere servant of darkness. He was the very embodiment of it. And from Minas Morgul in the south to the witch realm of Angmar in the north, his presence was ever a prophecy of doom. Where his shadow stretched, hope faded, and where his will was imposed, kingdoms fell. And for many long years to come, While he yet walked the lands of Middle-earth, peace would remain but a distant memory. For the Witch King had arisen, and he would not rest until the world of men was brought to ruin. Thank you very much for tuning into Realms Unravelled. We would like to take this opportunity to light the beacons and call for aid. If you did enjoy this video, we would ask that you kindly click the like button below. Also, we would be very grateful if you would consider subscribing and clicking on the bell icon. And until next time, farewell, fellow explorers of Middle-earth.